Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku accidentally opened a portal to the multiverse and met Miles Morales. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The silence in Gamma Gym was a heavy, unnatural thing. It wasn't the quiet of peace, but the hushed, waiting silence of a world holding its breath. Outside the reinforced plasteel windows, the UA high school campus was a fortress reborn, its familiar, optimistic architecture now crisscrossed with emergency barriers and automated turrets. The sky above was a pale, washed-out blue, as if the color had been bled from it during the long, brutal months of the Paranormal Liberation War. Every student, every teacher, wore the conflict like an invisible shroud. Smiles were rarer, steps were heavier, and the air itself seemed thick with unspoken grief and unrelenting tension. Nowhere was this tension more palpable than within the cavernous confines of the training facility. The gym, officially designated Training Gym Gamma, was a monument to controlled chaos. Its 50-meter-high ceiling was webbed with catwalks and support beams, and its vast floor was a patchwork of scarred concrete, pressure-sensitive plates, and configurable terrain simulators. It smelled of ozone, sweat, and the faint, metallic tang of stressed machinery. Today, however, it was a sanctuary of solitude for its two occupants. Izuku Midoriya stood at the center of the floor, a lone figure in his tattered and repaired hero costume, Gamma. The green fabric was stitched and patched in a dozen places, the armored plates scratched and scored with the memories of battles he was desperate to forget but couldn't. His mask was down, hood pulled back, revealing a face that had lost its boyish roundness. It was sharper now, framed by an untamable explosion of green-black hair and dominated by wide, sleepless eyes. Scars traced faint white lines across his hands and arms, a permanent cartography of his pain. He was a living conduit of impossible power, the ninth and final vessel of One for All. And he felt every ounce of its crushing weight. A few dozen meters away, leaning against the support pillar with a posture of practiced stillness, was the man who had given him that power. Toshinori Yagi, known to the world as the Indomitable All Might, was a ghost haunting the edges of his own legacy. In his skeletal form, the hero costume he'd once filled with impossible muscle now hung on him like a borrowed coat 2 sizes too large. He held a stainless steel thermos, its contents likely a nutrient-rich broth, and watched his successor with an expression of profound, aching concern. Young Midoriya, All Might's voice, though lacking its booming authority, still carried across the echoing space. That's enough for today. You've been at this for 6 hours. Any more and you risk exhaustion-induced backlash. Deku didn't turn. His gaze was fixed on his own hands, gloved and armored. He flexed his fingers, feeling the familiar, low-level hum of One for All simmering beneath his skin. It was a sensation as natural to him now as breathing, but it was also a constant, terrifying reminder of the volcano he struggled to contain. I'm not tired, All Might, he said, his voice rough. I can't afford to be. Shigaraki isn't resting. All for One isn't resting. The vestiges, they're restless. I can feel it. If I can't master them completely, if I can't draw out their full potential in perfect harmony, then everything we fought for, everyone we lost. He trailed off, the words catching in his throat. Gran Torino, Midnight. So many others. Their faces were a constant slideshow behind his eyes. I know, my boy. I know, Toshinori said, his voice gentle. He pushed himself off the pillar and walked slowly toward Deku, his footsteps soft on the concrete. But there is a difference between dedicated training and self-flagellation. You are treating your body like a machine, but it is not. It is flesh and blood, and your spirit. It needs rest as much as your muscles. Deku finally turned to face his mentor. The look in his eyes was raw, a mix of desperation and fierce, unyielding determination. That's the point, All Might. It's not just my body anymore. It's a vessel for them. For Nana Shimura. For Daigoro Banjo. For all of them. I can use their quirks, yes, but it feels disjointed. Like I'm juggling 7 different weapons at once. Black Whip for capture, FA Gene for momentum, Float for mobility, Danger Sense for warnings, they're all separate. But they shouldn't be. He took a deep, shuddering breath, his mind racing. He had spent countless nights poring over his notebooks, analyzing every scrap of information the vestiges had given him in his dreamlike consciousness. He'd theorized, hypothesized, and obsessed. In the vestiges' world, Deku continued, his voice gaining a feverish intensity, they aren't separate entities. They're connected. They're all part of the singular core of One for All. It's a single, unified power source with multiple expressions. If I can just find that core, if I can tap into the energy that links them all and channel it at once, I won't have to use Black Whip or activate FA gene. It would just be an extension of my will. The right tool for the right moment, instinctively. The control would be absolute. Toshinori stopped a few feet away, his brow furrowed. The theory was sound, born of Deku's brilliant analytical mind. But it was also terrifyingly ambitious. The sheer energy output of one of the ancillary quirks combined with One for All's base power was enough to level a city block. Combining all of them? The potential for catastrophic failure was immense. Izuku, Toshinori said, using his first name, a clear sign of his deep concern. That is a level of mastery that no user, not even the first, ever attempted. The human body has limits. The human mind has limits. What you are describing, it's like trying to listen to 7 different orchestras playing 7 different symphonies at the exact same time and picking out a single, unified melody. It could shatter your focus. The backlash could be, I have to try, Deku interrupted, his jaw set. Every time I lose control, even for a second, someone could get hurt. I can't let that happen again. I need this. I need to be better. His words hung in the air, heavy with the unspoken memory of his solo crusade, of the fear in the eyes of the civilians he'd sworn to protect, of the moment his friends had to literally drag him back from the brink of self-destruction. This wasn't just about power anymore. It was about atonement. All Might saw the iron resolve in his successor's eyes and knew he couldn't be talked down. He could only stand witness. He gave a slow, reluctant nod. Very well, my boy, but you will stop at the first sign of instability. The very first sign. Do you promise me that? I promise, Deku lied. He knew deep down that he wouldn't stop. He couldn't. He was chasing an absolute, a state of perfect control that might not even exist, because the alternative, the thought of his power running rampant, was a horror he refused to contemplate. He turned away from All Might, facing the empty expanse of the gym. He closed his eyes, sinking into the familiar sea of energy within him. He took a steadying breath, then another. The first step was to call them forth, one by one. First, FA gene. He felt the fourth user's quirk as a coiled spring in his muscles, a low thrum of stored kinetic energy. He performed a few simple squats, feeling the power build, contained and ready. Good. Next, float. Nana Shimura's quirk was a feeling of weightlessness, a gentle lift at the base of his spine. He allowed it to activate just enough to take a few centimeters of his weight off the floor, his boots hovering just above the concrete. Stable. Then, danger sense. The fourth user's second gift was a low, persistent hum at the back of his skull, a constant stream of benign input. The gym was safe. All Might was not a threat. The hum remained steady, a placid baseline. Controlled. Black Whip. This was the volatile one. He reached for Daigoro Banjo's quirk, feeling it as a network of seething, dark energy under his skin, eager to erupt. He carefully manifested a single, thin tendril from his right arm, letting it snake through the air before reabsorbing it. It obeyed his command without complaint. Manageable. Smoke screen and transmission were more abstract, but he could feel their potential, the sixth's obscuring mist and the second's gear-shifting velocity, held in reserve. Now came the moment of truth. He wouldn't just use them in sequence. He would try to merge their activation signals, to find the central node of power that the vestiges had spoken of. He visualized it as a burning star at the center of his being, the core of One for All. The other quirks were planets orbiting it. His goal was to pull their orbits into the star itself, to create a single, brilliant supernova of controlled energy. Here we go, he whispered to himself. He focused, pushing past the individual sensations. He ignored the feeling of the coiled spring, the lightness, the hum, the simmering tendrils. He reached deeper, for the raw, incandescent power that fueled them all. For a fleeting second, he felt it. A connection. A nexus point where all 7 streams of energy converged. It was glorious. It was terrifying. And then, it all went wrong. The hum of danger sense was the first to break. It didn't just spike, it shattered into a piercing, mind-splitting shriek. But it wasn't warning him of a villain or a falling piece of debris. The signal was inverted, screaming at him from the inside out. The danger wasn't external. The danger was him. Simultaneously, Black Whip exploded from his body. It wasn't the controlled, whip-like tendrils he was used to. This was a chaotic eruption of pure, black and green energy, lashing out in every direction like furious, untamed lightning. Thick cables of darkness slammed into the gym floor, cracking the concrete. They whipped upwards, gouging deep rents in the metal walls and shattering observation windows high above. Young Midoriya, stop! All Might's voice was a roar of panic, but Deku couldn't. He was no longer in control. The unified melody he'd sought had become a deafening cacophony. The energy was tearing through him, a raging river that had burst its banks. Green lightning, the pure, unfiltered essence of One for All, arced across his body, sizzling and crackling with apocalyptic fury. His muscles screamed in protest, threatening to tear themselves from the bone. I can't! He gasped, his teeth clenched so hard he tasted blood. And then came the new sensation. It was unlike any quirk he had ever felt. It wasn't kinetic, it wasn't elemental, it wasn't mental. It was spatial. It was a profound, nauseating wrongness in the very fabric of the world around him. It felt like the air in front of him was being stretched thin, like a piece of cosmic fabric pulled taut to the breaking point. A deep, resonant hum vibrated not in his ears, but in his bones, in the space between atoms. It was a latent quirk, something buried so deep within One for All that no one had ever known it was there. A quirk related to space, to dimensions, awakened by the unprecedented, chaotic surge of 6 others being forced into a feedback loop. The air 10 feet in front of him began to shimmer, like a heat haze on a summer road. But this was no heat haze. The shimmering intensified, twisting, distorting. The image of the far wall warped as if seen through a broken lens. What is that? Toshinori yelled, taking a half-step back, his hero instincts warring with his terror for his student. The shimmering coalesced. With a sound like 1,000 sheets of glass shattering in reverse, a vertical line of pure, brilliant light tore through the air. It ripped open, expanding into a jagged, unstable oval about 8 feet high. It wasn't a clean opening. The edges frothed and churned with raw, green One for All lightning, the same energy that was still racking Deku's body. The interior of the oval was not blackness, but a roiling, glitching vortex of impossible colors. Flashing, geometric patterns and vibrant, bleeding hues pulsed within its depths, and overlaid on it all was a bizarre, distinct visual static, like tiny, colorful dots fizzing in and out of existence. It was a portal. A wound in reality. And Deku had just ripped it open with his bare hands. Miles Morales was in his element. The world outside his dorm room at Brooklyn Visions Academy could be complicated, dangerous, and demanding. Being Spider-Man was a constant, high-wire balancing act of homework, heroics, and hiding his identity from his loving, perpetually worried parents. But in here, with his headphones on, the world simplified. The smooth, mellow beat of a Sway Lee track filled his ears, a perfect rhythm for the task at hand. His sketchbook lay open on his desk, the lamplight illuminating the crisp white page. In his hand, a 6B pencil danced across the paper, its graphite tip whispering with each stroke. He was sketching a new suit design, a variation on his classic black and red. This one had more angular, web-like patterns running down the arms and a slightly modified spider emblem, its legs sharper, more aggressive. His room was a controlled explosion of his personality. Posters of Chance the Rapper and Childish Gambino shared wall space with intricate anatomical studies of spiders. Stacks of comics were piled precariously next to half-finished physics textbooks. A collection of spray paint cans, in every color imaginable, were neatly arranged on a shelf above his bed, a testament to his other artistic love. This room was his sanctuary, the one place where Miles Morales and Spider-Man could coexist without conflict. He leaned back, admiring his work. The design was coming along. Maybe he'd add some white accents, like Gwen's suit. He smiled softly at the thought of her. The connection they shared, maintained by a piece of cobbled-together interdimensional tech, was a fragile but precious lifeline. It had been quiet for a few days, but that was normal. Time flowed differently, signals dropped. Still, he missed her. He missed all of them, Peterby, Spider-Ham, the whole chaotic, wonderful family he'd found. He was just about to add a final shading detail to the mask's eye lens when the first thing happened. The music in his headphones distorted. Sway Lee's smooth vocals suddenly stretched and warped into a low, demonic growl before cutting out into sharp static. Miles winced, pulling the headphones off. Cheap wiring, he muttered, fiddling with the jack. Then the second thing happened. The light from his desk lamp flickered violently, and the colors in the room seemed to desaturate for a split second, turning a muted, sickly gray before snapping back to normal. Miles blinked, his heart giving a little flutter. That was weird. A power surge? The third thing happened an instant later, and it was the one that sent a jolt of pure ice through his veins. His spidey sense went off. It wasn't the usual, directional prickle that warned of an incoming punch or a stray bullet. It wasn't the citywide thrum of general danger. This was a chaotic, agonizing explosion of sensation at the base of his skull. It felt like every nerve ending was firing at once, a symphony of alarm with no discernible source or direction. It screamed wrong, wrong, wrong in a language older than words. He shot to his feet, knocking his chair over. His eyes darted around the room. The window was closed. The door was locked. There was nothing. The threat wasn't in the room. It wasn't in the hallway. It was everywhere. And nowhere. The very fabric of his reality began to stutter. The edge of his desk pixeled, breaking apart into tiny, floating squares of color for a horrifying moment before snapping back together. The poster on his wall glitched, Childish Gambino's face momentarily replaced with a flash of a green, angular character he'd never seen before. Then the pull started. It was a physical force, like a super magnet had been activated somewhere deep inside the earth. It wasn't pulling him down, or sideways. It was pulling him inward, toward a focal point that seemed to exist in the middle of his own body. His sketchbook slid off the desk, its pages fluttering as it was yanked toward the center of the room. The spray paint cans rattled on their shelf, then shot off, clattering together in midair before being pulled into the same invisible vortex. "What is happening?" he yelled, his voice strained. He tried to plant his feet, but the floor itself felt like it was dissolving beneath him. His body began to glitch, his arm turning into a cascade of red and blue dots, the same horrifying effect he'd seen on his friends when their dimensions rejected them. But he was in his dimension. This shouldn't be happening. The world outside his window vanished, replaced by a swirling tunnel of blinding light and screaming color. The pull intensified, yanking him off his feet. He felt a nauseating lurch, a feeling of being turned inside out and squeezed through an impossibly small hole. He saw a flash of green lightning, heard a sound like a cosmic scream, and then his world dissolved into a disorienting, tumbling blackness. He was falling. The fall ended as abruptly as it began. Miles hit the ground hard, his shoulder and hip taking the brunt of the impact. The air was driven from his lungs in a sharp hoof. He landed in a heap, a tangle of limbs and confusion, on a surface that was cold, hard, and unforgiving. Concrete. It smelled different, though. Cleaner. Sharper. His head was ringing, a low droning hum that vibrated behind his eyes. His spidey sense was still a chaotic throb of pain, but it was slightly less intense now, more of a focused, pounding ache directed at something nearby. He pushed himself up onto his hands and knees, shaking his head to clear it. He was wearing his gray hoodie, shorts, and his favorite pair of red and black sneakers. Under his sleeves, the familiar weight of his web shooters was a small, cold comfort. He finally looked up, and the world tilted on its axis all over again. He was in a gymnasium. But it was a gymnasium built for giants. The ceiling was lost in shadows high above, and the sheer scale of the place was staggering. The walls were made of a strange, seamless metal, scarred and battered with impacts that looked more like artillery strikes than stray basketballs. And he was not alone. Standing about 30 feet away was a figure straight out of a nightmare, or a comic book. A boy, maybe a year or two older than him, was encased in green hero armor that looked like it had been through a war. Scars littered any visible patch of skin. His face was a mask of pure, undiluted horror. And crackling around his body, like a dying fire, were residual sparks of terrifying green lightning. This figure was the source of his spidey sense's agonizing alarm. Next to him stood another man, impossibly thin and skeletal, with sunken eyes and sharp, blonde bangs that framed a face etched with shock and worry. He was wearing the tattered remains of a blue, red, and white costume that looked vaguely, strangely, familiar. But it was the thing behind them that stole Miles's breath. It was the source of the pull. A tear in the universe. It hung in the air, a vertical wound of glitching light and swirling, chaotic energy. He could see his own dorm room through it, distorted and warped, a scene of impossible physics with his belongings still swirling in the air. He saw his sketchbook, its pages frozen mid-flutter, before the image dissolved into a cascade of Kirby dots. This was wrong. This was Kingpin's Collider all over again, but different. Wilder. More organic. The green-haired boy's lightning finally sputtered out. He took a staggering step back, his eyes, wide and green, locked onto Miles. He looked from Miles to the portal, and then back to Miles. The horror on his face deepened, mixed with a dawning, crushing guilt. He raised his hands, as if to prove they were empty, and the last of the energy receded into his body. With the energy source seemingly contained, Miles expected the portal to collapse. He had seen it happen before. The energy signature fades, reality snaps back into place, the dimensional seams restitch themselves. But it didn't. The portal flickered violently. It shrank, contracting from an 8-foot oval to a 5-foot one, but it didn't close. It stabilized, humming with a low, menacing thrum, a permanent, festering wound in the air. A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the gym, broken only by the portal's low hum and the ragged sound of 3 people breathing. Deku stared. His mind, usually a whirlwind of analysis and strategy, was a complete, static-filled blank. He had done this. His desperate, reckless push for control had resulted in the exact opposite, the most profound loss of control in his life. He hadn't just broken a wall or endangered a teammate. He had broken the world itself, and from that break, a person had fallen out. A kid. A civilian, by the looks of it. A teenager in a hoodie and shorts, now kneeling on the floor of the gym, looking terrified and confused. Deku's worst fear, the fear that had driven him to isolate himself, to push his body and spirit to their absolute limits, had been realized. His power had hurt someone. It had ripped this boy from his home, his world, his life, and thrown him into here. The guilt was a physical thing, a lead weight settling in his gut, so heavy he could barely stand. All Might stood frozen, his analytical mind trying to process the impossible. An interdimensional portal. A side effect of a quirk overload. The boy, he didn't radiate the same energy as the portal. He seemed normal. Frightened, but normal. But his posture was tense, coiled. Not just a civilian then. Someone with instincts. Miles pushed himself to his feet, his movements slow and deliberate. He kept his eyes locked on the green-haired kid. The spidey sense pain was still there, a dull throb that pulsed in time with the low hum of the portal. It was centered entirely on that kid. He was the key. He was the danger. Or maybe, he was the cause. Miles's hand subconsciously drifted lower, his fingers hovering just over the trigger of his right web shooter. He was out of his depth, in a place he didn't know, facing forces he didn't understand. But he wasn't helpless. He was Spider-Man. And the first rule of being Spider-Man was that when you're scared, you stand your ground. They stared at each other across the 20 feet of scarred concrete that now felt like a universe-wide chasm. One hero, clad in the armor and scars of a bitter war, crackling with the residue of a power that could shatter reality, his face a portrait of horrified guilt. The other, a kid in a hoodie and sneakers, armed with a secret and a stubborn refusal to back down, his eyes wide with a fear that was slowly hardening into resolve. The glitching portal hummed between them, a constant, terrible reminder of the mistake that connected them, a doorway that refused to close. And in that silent, impossible moment, two worlds, and two very different heroes, collided. The silence that followed the portal's partial collapse was a different beast from the one that had preceded it. It was no longer the heavy silence of waiting, but the thin, sharp-edged silence of shock. The air in Gamma Gym was electric, saturated with the ozone scent of spent power and the profound, physical wrongness of the shimmering tear that hung between two realities. 3 sets of lungs drew ragged breaths, each one a testament to a different kind of terror. For Izuku Midoriya, the silence was a judge's gavel. Every quiet second was a new count on the indictment against him. He saw the boy, the victim, push himself to his feet, a fluid grace in his movements that spoke of a latent athleticism, a coiled readiness that belied his casual attire. The boy's hand hovered near his side, his posture a textbook example of a defensive crouch. Deku's war-honed instincts, honed by battles against killers and fanatics, screamed threat assessment. He catalogued the details automatically: lean build, deceptive strength, low center of gravity, heightened awareness. He was prepared for a fight. But the logical part of his brain, the part that still belonged to the hero-obsessed boy who filled notebooks with analysis, was drowned out by a tidal wave of guilt. This wasn't a villain. This was a kid in a hoodie who was probably worried about homework 5 minutes ago. A kid who was now looking at him with wide, frightened eyes, trapped in a place he didn't belong because of a mistake Deku had made. The tactical analysis felt like a betrayal. He wasn't supposed to profile civilians, he was supposed to save them. And he had just done the exact opposite. He forced his own body to relax, a monumental effort of will. He lowered his arms, unclenching his fists finger by painful finger, trying to project an aura of non-aggression that felt utterly alien to his combat-ready state. Across the chasm of scarred concrete, Miles Morales got his feet under him. His spidey sense was no longer a piercing shriek but had settled into a throbbing, bass-heavy hum, a painful metronome counting out the beats of the crisis. The hum was centered on the green-haired kid, a pulsing beacon of wrongness. He was the epicenter. The cause. The walking, breathing source of the dimensional tear that had ripped Miles from his home. Fear was a cold knot in Miles's stomach, but it was a familiar fear. He'd felt it facing the Prowler. He'd felt it staring down Kingpin. Fear was just the prelude. It was what you did next that mattered. Peter B. had taught him that. He catalogued his own situation, web shooters on and presumably functional, though he had no idea if the fluid would even work the same way here. He was outnumbered, 2-1, if the impossibly skinny man counted. And the main guy, the green one, was radiating an aura of power so immense it felt like standing next to a nuclear reactor. But Miles also saw the look in his eyes. It wasn't malice. It wasn't aggression. It was horror. And guilt. The kind of look you see on someone who's just dropped a priceless vase and is waiting for the yelling to start. This kid was scared too. It was Toshinori Yagi who finally broke the standoff. He had seen enough battles, enough confrontations, to recognize the precipice they were on. 2 young men, both coiled springs of power and fear, a single wrong move away from a conflict that could only escalate the catastrophe. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, placing himself slightly between them, his posture that of a mediator, not a combatant. "Easy, both of you," he said, his voice calm and even, cutting through the tension. He addressed Miles directly, his gaze gentle but firm. "Son, you are safe. No one here means you any harm. My name is Toshinori Yagi. This is a training facility. There has been an accident." The understatement of the century. Miles's eyes flickered from the green-haired kid to the skeletal man. Toshinori's calm demeanor did more to de-escalate the situation than anything else. It was the voice of a grown-up, a voice that promised, however faintly, a return to sanity. "An accident?" Miles's voice came out raspier than he intended. He gestured with a shaky hand at the pulsating, glitching tear in reality. "You call that an accident? Where am I? What is this place?" Deku flinched as if struck. The boy's words, though not accusatory, landed like blows. He felt a desperate urge to apologize, to explain, to fix it, but the words were a logjam in his throat. All Might answered for him. "You are at Yui High School, in Japan." Miles's brain short-circuited. Japan? He'd been in his dorm room in Brooklyn. He looked from All Might to Deku. They were both Japanese. The architecture, though bizarre, had a certain clean, angular aesthetic he now recognized from manga. The implications crashed down on him. This wasn't just another part of the city. He was halfway across the world. Or was it just the world? The portal, the glitching, the feeling of being pulled apart, it all felt terrifyingly familiar. And you are? All Might prompted gently. Miles hesitated for a second, then decided a real name was better than a lie. Miles. Miles Morales. Well, Miles Morales, Tashinori said, offering a thin, reassuring smile. We are going to figure this out. I promise you. He then turned his gaze to his student. The look was sharp, meaningful. Talk to him. Deku swallowed hard, forcing himself to move. He took a slow step forward, then another, stopping a respectful 10 feet away. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of deep, formal apology. I am so sorry, he said, his voice thick with shame. This is my fault. I lost control. I did this to you. My name is Izuku Midoriya. Miles watched the bow, a gesture he'd only ever seen in movies. It was so earnest, so full of genuine remorse, that it chipped away another piece of his fear, replacing it with a profound sense of bewilderment. You did this? Miles asked, his eyes wide. How? What are you? The question hung in the air, simple and direct. And for Deku, it was the hardest question in the world to answer. How could he explain one for all? The vestiges? The generations of sacrifice and struggle that culminated in this catastrophic failure? I have a quirk, he began, falling back on the fundamental terminology of his world. Miles just stared. A what? A quirk? Like you bite your nails? No, a quirk. Deku tried again, his frustration with his own inability to explain growing. It's a superpower. A special ability. In my world, about 80% of the population is born with one. Some people can breathe fire, some can turn their skin to steel, some can talk to animals. It's normal, Miles's mind reeled. A world where almost everyone was a superhero. Or a supervillain? That was insane. It sounded like a comic book his friend Gank would write. Okay, he said slowly, trying to process it. So, what's your quirk? The one that rips holes in the universe? Deku's face tightened. It's complicated. My quirk is called One for All. It's a power that can be passed down from person to person. It stockpiles power with each new user. I'm the 9th, he gestured vaguely at Tashinori. He was the 8th. Miles looked from the superpowered, lightning-read teenager to the gaunt, skeletal man who looked like he'd have trouble opening a pickle jar. He tried to connect the two and came up with a complete blank. And inside One for All, Deku pressed on, his voice dropping, are the quirks of the past users. I can use them, too. I was trying to unify them. To channel them all at once. And I guess I broke something. Miles absorbed this. Passed down power. Multiple powers in one. He thought of the different spiders in the collider, all with the same basic power set but with their own unique variations. There was a faint echo of familiarity in the concept, twisted through a different lens. Okay, Miles said again, his mind slowly catching up. So, you're like a big deal here, huh? Deku looked down, the guilt returning full force. I'm supposed to be a hero. I'm supposed to save people. His voice was barely a whisper. Not this. Now it was All Might's turn to look at Miles. And you, young man? You seem remarkably calm for someone who has just been pulled through a dimensional rift. Are you also a quirk user? Miles froze. This was it. The moment of truth. He was in a world of superpowered individuals. Admitting he had powers might be the safest thing to do. He thought about how to phrase it. He took a breath, letting a bit of his own Brooklyn swagger seep back into his voice. It was a defense mechanism, a comfortable mask to wear when he felt anything but comfortable. Nah, no quirk, he said, shaking his head. My story's a little more low budget. Got bit by a radioactive spider. Deku's head snapped up. His analytical brain, which had been dormant under the weight of his guilt, suddenly rebooted with a jolt. Radioactive spider? Probability of genetic mutation via arachnid-based radioactive venom infusion. Biologically inconsistent with known principles. However, in a reality where quirks exist, must reevaluate baseline assumptions. Could this be a quirk manifestation triggered by an external stimulus? Or is it something else entirely? All Might just looked confused. A spider? A very specific, genetically engineered, radioactive spider. Miles clarified, as if that explained everything. It was weird. I was painting, this thing bit me, next thing I know I'm sticking to everything, I'm crazy strong, and I have this buzz in my head that warns me about stuff. He tapped the back of his skull. So yeah, that's my deal. He left out the part about turning invisible. And the venom blast. Best to keep a few tricks up his sleeve until he knew who he could trust. There was a beat of silence as the two men from this world processed his explanation. It was Deku who finally broke it, a flicker of something other than guilt in his eyes. It was academic curiosity. So your abilities aren't innate? They were acquired? Deku asked, his inner notebook filler taking over. Yup. Totally acquired, Miles said. He looked at his hands, then back at Deku. A thought struck him, a point of connection in this sea of madness. He used the line he thought of earlier, a line that now seemed more appropriate than ever. So you said your power comes with the quirks of past users? Ghosts, kinda, Deku nodded slowly. Yes. I can commune with their consciousnesses. Miles gave a wry, humorless smile. Okay, weird. My power comes with a serious craving for burgers and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. He met Deku's eyes, his own expression turning serious. I know what it feels like to have a world-changing power you didn't ask for land on your shoulders. And to have it go wrong. In that moment, the dynamic shifted. The chasm between them didn't vanish, but a fragile bridge of understanding began to form across it. Deku saw not just a victim, but a reflection. A boy his own age, burdened with a secret and a responsibility he never chose. He saw the same exhaustion in Miles's eyes that he saw in his own reflection every morning. The fear was still there, but it was now overlaid with a thin, precious layer of empathy. All Might watched the exchange, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. They were talking. They were connecting. This was the first, crucial step. But his practical mind knew that empathy wouldn't close the portal. This is a situation far beyond our expertise, Tashinori said, his voice pulling them back to the grim reality of their predicament. He pulled a reinforced, hero-grade smartphone from a pouch on his belt. I need to make a call. Young Midoriya, stay with our guest. Try to keep things calm. He walked away toward the far corner of the gym, his thumb already dialing a number. Deku and Miles were left in an awkward silence, the hum of the portal filling the void. Deku shoved his hands in his pockets, a nervous habit from a lifetime ago that had suddenly returned. So, you at high school? Miles asked, breaking the silence. He gestured at the massive, battle-scarred gym. You guys played dodgeball a little rough here, or what? A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Deku's lips. It was the first time he'd felt the impulse in what felt like an eternity. Something like that, he said. He pointed to a massive crack in the floor, spiderwebbing out from a central impact point. That was me, first year. Broke 3 fingers. He pointed to a series of deep gouges in the wall. That was also me, trying to control a new part of my quirk. He didn't look at the shattered observation windows high above. They were too fresh, a result of the very same power surge that had brought Miles here. Miles followed his gaze, taking in the sheer destruction. This wasn't a school gym, it was a war zone. He thought of his own high school, Brooklyn visions. The biggest danger there was Mr. Chamberlain's surprise pop quizzes in chemistry. The difference was staggering. You said your world, Miles said, his voice softer now. Sounds like it's been rough. Deku's fleeting smile vanished. The shroud of the war settled back over him. You have no idea, he murmured. On the other side of the gym, All Might's call connected. Principal Mizu, he said, his voice low and urgent. Tashinori. Came a cheerful, high-pitched voice from the phone's speaker, a voice that was perpetually, unnervingly calm. To what do I owe the pleasure? I trust young Midoriya's specialized training session is proceeding without incident? Tashinori let out a long, weary sigh. You could say there has been an incident, sir. A rather unprecedented one. There was a pause on the other end. Define unprecedented, Niza said, the cheerfulness in his tone replaced by a razor-sharp focus. Young Midoriya attempted a full synchronization of the one-for-all vestiges. All Might explained, his words clipped and precise. The energy output was exponential. It appears to have awakened a latent, previously unknown spatial distortion quirk within the core. He could almost hear the cogs turning in Niza's hyper-intelligent brain. A spatial distortion quirk? Yes, sir. It has resulted in the manifestation of a stable, self-sustaining, and as far as we can tell, interdimensional portal in the center of Gamma Gym. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. For a single, terrifying second, Tashinori thought he might have actually broken the unflappable principle of UA. Then Niza spoke, his voice laced with a terrifying cocktail of grave concern and sheer, unadulterated scientific glee. Fascinating. Is it hostile? The portal itself, no. But, sir, something came through it. A boy. From another dimension, it seems. He calls himself Miles Morales. He appears to be unharmed, but he is displaced. A trans-dimensional visitor. Niza mused. The theoretical implications are staggering. I am placing the campus on a level 3 quiet alert. All patrols are to double their perimeter sweeps, but maintain a low profile. No one is to approach Gamma Gym. This situation requires finesse, not force. I agree, sir, All Might said. But we have a more immediate problem than theoretical implications. We have a hole in the universe in our school, and we have no idea how to close it. Indeed, Niza replied. Conventional solutions will not apply. This is not a problem of power, but of physics. Highly irregular physics. We need a specialist. Someone whose mind operates on a different axis from the rest of us. Someone who sees impossible engineering challenges as a personal playground. Tashinori knew exactly who he meant. Hatsume, precisely, Niza confirmed. I'll have her sent to your location immediately with a mobile analysis unit. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt to interact with the portal. Do not throw anything into it. Do not let young Midoriya try to fix it with more power. Just observe, wait, and for heaven's sake, Tashinori, try to be a good host. The line clicked dead. All Might lowered the phone, feeling a sliver of relief. Help was on the way. The most brilliant, if eccentric, mind at UA was on the case. He turned back to see Deku and Miles standing near the portal, not talking, but simply observing the swirling vortex. There was a shared awe and terror in their posture. They looked, for all the world, like two teenagers in way over their heads. Which, he supposed, was exactly what they were. As he walked back toward them, a new, more horrifying thought occurred to him. If the door could open one way, it stood to reason it could open the other. What else might be pulled through from this other dimension? Or, for that matter, what from their world might be pulled in? The stakes of Deku's mistake were growing with every passing minute. The wait for Hatsume was a strange, suspended period of calm. The initial adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and a gnawing anxiety. Deku, unable to stand still, began to pace the perimeter of the gym, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Miles, meanwhile, found himself drawn to the portal. He kept a safe distance, but his artist's eye was captivated by the impossible display. The colors churning within it were shades he'd never seen before, hues that seemed to violate the very laws of light. The glitching, the fizzing Kirby dots, the way the image of his own world would occasionally flash into view, distorted and broken. It was terrifying, but it was also mesmerizing. Does it hurt to look at? Deku asked, pausing his pacing to watch him. Miles shook his head. No. It's just a lot. I've seen something like it before. A machine called the Super Collider. It was trying to do this on purpose. It pulled a bunch of my friends into my world. We had to shut it down before it destroyed my whole city. Deku stopped dead. You've dealt with this before? Sort of, Miles admitted. That was a machine. This feels different. More natural, if that makes any sense. Which is even weirder. He looked from the portal to Deku. The machine was powered by, well, a lot of stuff. This thing is powered by you. The statement was not an accusation, but a simple fact. Still, it landed with the force of a physical blow. Deku's gaze fell to his hands. I know. Suddenly, the portal flickered. It was a violent, convulsive spasm. The humming sound pitched upward into a shrill whine. The stable oval shape wobbled, expanding and contracting like a dying heart. Both boys stumbled back, their instincts screaming at them. For Miles, the flicker was accompanied by a blinding flash of pain behind his eyes, far sharper than the constant hum of his spidey sense. It was a searing, white-hot agony that made him cry out and clutch his head. And in that moment of agony, something new happened. From the pocket of his shorts, his phone, which had been silent and dark since his arrival, suddenly clattered to the floor. The screen lit up, not with his lock screen, but with a glitching, static-filled image. For a terrifying second, the static cleared, and an image resolved itself. It was a live feed somehow, a security camera view of his father, Jefferson Davis, standing in the hallway of their apartment building, talking to a neighbor. He was smiling, his arms crossed, completely unaware that his son was watching him from another dimension. Dad? Miles whispered, his voice choked with a sudden, overwhelming wave of homesickness and fear. The image on the phone flickered again, distorting horribly. His father's face stretched, pixelated, and dissolved into a meaningless pattern of colors. The portal pulsed again, this time with a deep, resonant thump that they felt in their chests. And then came the jolt. It was nothing like his spidey sense. It wasn't a warning. It was an attack. A deep, cellular-level vibration seized Miles's body. It felt like every atom was being tugged, pulled toward the portal. It was a feeling of erasure, of coming undone at the seams. It was the same sensation he'd felt when he was being ripped from his dorm room, but less intense, a horrifying echo. It lasted only for a second, but it left him trembling, a cold sweat breaking out on his brow. He stared at the portal, then at his own hands, which felt strangely disconnected from his body. The pieces clicked into place in his mind with horrifying clarity. The glitching phone. The image of his father. The physical jolt of pain. The portal wasn't just a passive doorway. It was active. It was unstable. And its instability was linked directly to him. When the super collider was active, his friends had glitched because they didn't belong in his dimension. Their very atoms were rejecting the reality they were in. Now, the roles were reversed. He was the one glitching. But it wasn't just him. The portal itself was the source of the instability. It was a wound held open by two incompatible energies. Deku's one for all on one side, and the residual energy of Miles's home dimension on the other. And as long as he, a living, breathing piece of that dimension, was here, the portal had an anchor. A target. A focus. It was feeding on his connection to his home. It was trying to pull more of his reality through, and the strain of that effort was causing him to physically break down. "It's me," he said, his voice barely audible. He looked at Deku, his eyes wide with a new, more specific kind of terror. "The portal. It's connected to me. As long as I'm here, it's going to keep trying to pull my world apart." The crash of the reinforced blast doors sliding open was a sudden, violent intrusion into the tense atmosphere of Gamma Gym. The sound, like grinding tectonic plates, echoed off the high ceiling, making both Deku and Miles jump. Framed in the massive doorway was a figure who seemed to have been assembled from pure, unrestrained chaos. May Hatsume stood there, a whirlwind in a grease-stained jumpsuit. Her pink dreadlocks, tied back in a messy but functional knot, bounced with an energy that seemed to defy gravity. A pair of oversized, multi-lens goggles were pushed up onto her forehead, the various lenses clicking and whirring as they automatically scanned the room. She wasn't walking, she was practically vibrating with an enthusiasm so potent it was almost a physical force. Behind her, two small, hovering drone platforms floated silently, laden with silver cases and spools of thick, glowing cables. Her wild, gear-shaped irises scanned the gym, bypassing the two teenagers and the skeletal All Might entirely. Her gaze landed on the shimmering, glitching tear in reality, and a massive, toothy grin spread across her face. It was the look of a master chef seeing a cut of meat so rare and exotic it defied description. "Oh ho ho! Now that's what I'm talking about!" she boomed, her voice a cheerful foghorn. She marched into the gym, her heavy-duty work boots clanking on the concrete. She didn't even seem to notice the people. Her entire universe had contracted to the impossible phenomenon hanging in the air. A self-sustaining, extra-dimensional spatio-temporal fissure with a visible event horizon. Look at the energy bleed. It's beautiful. Absolutely magnificent. She came to a halt a few feet from the portal, her head cocked, her expression one of rapturous adoration. She called out over her shoulder without looking. Power loader said it was a containment breach. That's like calling the sun a light bulb. This isn't a breach. This is a breakthrough. A glorious, beautiful, world-shattering baby. Miles stared at her, his jaw slack. He'd seen a lot of weird things in the last couple of years. He'd met a talking pig with a mallet. He'd fought a cyborg scorpion man. But this girl, with her manic energy and her unabashed love for the cosmic horror that had ruined his day, was somehow one of the weirdest. Baby? He whispered to Deku. Hatsume-san is our best support course student. Deku whispered back, a mixture of awe and trepidation in his own voice. She's enthusiastic. All Might stepped forward, clearing his throat. Hatsume. The situation is extremely delicate. May finally seemed to register the presence of other humans. She spun around, her grin unwavering. All Might! And Midoriya! So you're the proud papa? Congratulations! What did you use to get it started? A focused kinetic burst? A vibratory cascade? Don't tell me you figured out how to fold space using raw bioenergy. Because I have been working on that for months and I will be so jealous. Before Deku could even begin to stammer out an answer, May's hyper-focused gaze landed on Miles. Her goggles clicked down over her eyes, lenses whirring and focusing. A series of green and blue readouts flickered across their surface. And who's this little guy? She chirped. Subject 0? The anchor point? Ooh, look at that! His quantum signature is all fuzzy. He's resonating on a completely different frequency from our baseline reality. He's not just from another place, he's from another rule set. Fascinating. She bounded over to Miles, getting uncomfortably close, and began circling him like a curious shark. She poked his shoulder with a gloved finger. Solid. Corporeal. But the energy readings are off the charts. You're like a walking, talking paradox. How does it feel? Do you feel tingly? Does light bend around you when you're not looking? Can I get a tissue sample? Miles took a nervous step back, bumping into one of the drone platforms. Whoa, hey, personal space, he said, holding his hands up. And no, you can't have a tissue sample, Deku quickly intervened. Hatsume-san, please. He's scared. We all are. We need to figure out how to close this thing and get him home. May waved a dismissive hand, though her grin softened slightly into a look of professional focus. Right. Business before pleasure. Closing the baby is just disassembling it in reverse. First, we need to know what we're dealing with. She snapped her fingers, and the drone platforms whirred to life. They zipped around the gym, deploying an array of sophisticated sensors. Tripod-mounted dishes unfolded, humming with power. Long, articulated arms extended, their tips glowing with analytical light, cautiously approaching the edge of the portal. Cables snaked across the floor, connecting everything to a central console that unfolded from one of the silver cases. May leaped onto the console, her fingers flying across a holographic interface that sprang to life, displaying streams of complex data and fluctuating energy graphs. Okay, let's see what we've got, she muttered to herself, her eyes darting across the screen. Primary power source signature matches Midoriya's one for all output, but it's messy. A feedback loop of 7 distinct energy patterns, all amplified and running wild. But that's just what's keeping the MHA side of the door open. She pointed a finger at the screen. There's a secondary, exotic energy signature pushing back from the other side. It's weaker, more diffuse, but it's what's preventing the fissure from collapsing on itself. It's like two people holding a door open, one pushing and one pulling. She turned to Miles. That's your world's energy. Your home dimension's background radiation, for lack of a better term. And you. Her goggles focused on him again. You're drenched in it. You're a beacon. The portal is using your quantum signature as a homing device, constantly trying to lock on and stabilize the connection. Miles's blood ran cold. It was exactly what he had feared, but hearing it confirmed by this manic girl genius made it terrifyingly real. So what does that mean? May's face, for the first time, lost some of its manic cheer. The grin was replaced by a look of sober, analytical concern. It means this isn't a stable doorway. It's a siphon. The portal is actively pulling on your reality, trying to draw more energy and matter through to sustain itself. It's creating a localized reality bleed. A what? All Might asked, stepping closer to the console. A bleed, May repeated, gesturing around the gym. Think of it like this, our reality is a bucket of blue paint. His is a bucket of red paint. Midoriya's power knocked a hole between the buckets. Now, the red paint is trying to leak into the blue. The portal is the hole, and our friend Miles here is like a big drop of red paint that already came through, making it easier for more red to follow. As if on cue, the first major symptom of the collapse began to manifest. It started subtly. The far wall of the gym, a solid slab of reinforced plasteel, flickered. For a split second, its smooth, gray surface was replaced by the rough, unmistakable texture of weathered red brick, complete with a faded, graffiti-style tag of a crown. Then, just as quickly, it snapped back to normal. Everyone froze. Did you see that? Deku whispered, his eyes wide. Before anyone could answer, it happened again. The large digital clock on the wall, which displayed the time in a crisp, 24-hour format, suddenly glitched. The numbers dissolved into a mess of pixels, then reformed to show a classic, analog clock face, its hands pointing to a time that was 3 hours behind theirs. A moment later, it reverted to the digital display. The bleed is accelerating, May said, her voice tight. Her fingers flew across her console, her previous excitement now completely replaced by frantic urgency. The dimensional barrier is becoming more permeable. The localized reality field is destabilizing. A wave of dizziness washed over Miles. The floor beneath his feet seemed to shift, to lose its solidity. He stumbled, catching himself on the edge of May's console. The air in his lungs felt thin, recycled. It didn't feel like the air from his world. It felt alien. Wrong. Then came the gravity fluctuation. Without warning, the familiar downward pull of the earth lessened. All Might, in his skeletal form, floated a half-inch off the ground, his eyes wide with shock. Deku, who was used to Nana Shimura's float quirk, instinctively stabilized himself, but the sensation was nauseatingly different. It wasn't the controlled lift of his quirk. It was as if the fundamental laws of physics were having a seizure. Loose debris on the floor, pebbles, dust, a forgotten bolt, rose into the air, hovering lazily for 3 long seconds before crashing back down as gravity reasserted itself with a sickening lurch. Miles felt his stomach turn. He'd swung through the canyons of New York City, he'd fallen from skyscrapers, but this feeling of the world itself coming untethered was a new and profound kind of horror. The glitches grew more aggressive, more surreal. One of the training robots in the corner, a heavily armored mannequin used for target practice, suddenly whirred to life. Its optical sensors glowed red, and its speaker, which was supposed to be silent, crackled with static. Then, a voice, gravelly and thick with a distinct New York accent, blared out into the gym. Hey, I'm walking here. What, you think you own the whole street? Get out of the way, pal! The robot swiveled its head, then powered down, slumping back into its inert state. The voice, unmistakably that of a Brooklyn taxi dispatcher or an irate pedestrian, echoed in the stunned silence. Miles felt a pang of something sharp and painful in his chest. It was a sliver of home, a familiar sound twisted into a bizarre, robotic mockery. It made the distance between where he was and where he belonged feel infinite. But for Deku, each new glitch was another nail in his coffin of guilt. He saw the flicker of the brick wall, the shift in gravity, the disembodied voice from a world he had endangered. He saw the look of terror and disorientation on Miles's face, a look that was a direct result of his own hubris. The weight on his shoulders became unbearable. He backed away from the group, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. His vision tunneled. The walls of the gym seemed to be closing in. He clutched his head, his own thoughts a swirling vortex of self-recrimination. This is my fault. My power. My mistake. I wanted to save everyone. I wanted to be the perfect hero, the one who never fails, who never lets anyone get hurt. And what did I do? I broke reality. I'm not just failing to save my world, I'm actively destroying someone else's. I'm no better than Shigaraki. He destroys with his hands, I destroy with my good intentions. I'm a walking disaster. A liability. All for one was right. This power is a curse. He stumbled back until his shoulders hit the cold metal wall, and he slid down to the floor, pulling his knees to his chest. He was spiraling, caught in the undertow of his own despair. The pressure of being the symbol of peace, the hope of a nation, the inheritor of this sacred torch, it had all cracked under the strain, and now the darkness was pouring in. He was just a kid, a quirkless, useless Deku who had been given a power far too great for him to handle. All Might saw the spiral beginning. He started toward Deku, his face etched with worry. Young Midoriya, but someone else got there first. Miles had been watching Deku. He saw the boy's retreat, the panic in his eyes, the way he curled into himself as if trying to disappear. He saw the self-blame, the crushing weight of a mistake too big to comprehend. And it was so familiar it hurt. He remembered the feeling after his Peter Parker died. The cold dread in the alleyway. The weight of the flash drive in his pocket. The knowledge that if he had just been better, faster, stronger, Peter might still be alive. He remembered holding up in his dorm room, tangled in his own limbs, convinced he was a failure, a pretender, a kid in a costume who was going to get everyone killed. He remembered the feeling of wanting to just quit, to hand the mask to someone else, anyone else. He walked over to Deku, his footsteps quiet on the concrete floor. He crouched down, bringing himself to Deku's level. Deku didn't look up. He just stared at the floor between his knees, his shoulders shaking slightly. Hey! Miles said softly. Deku didn't respond. Midoriya! Miles said again, a little firmer this time. Look at me! Slowly, reluctantly, Deku lifted his head. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, lost in the depths of his own failure. Freaking out right now? Totally valid, Miles said, his voice even and calm. He wasn't offering platitudes or false reassurances. He was offering the simple, profound truth. I mean, look at this place. The walls are changing their minds about what they want to be, the robots are yelling at people, and there's a giant, universe-eating hole in the middle of your gym. If you weren't freaking out, I'd be worried you were the crazy one. A tiny, involuntary huff of air, not quite a laugh, escaped Deku's lips. It was a start. I've been there. Miles continued, his voice dropping. He sat down on the floor, leaning his back against the wall next to Deku. He stared out at the portal, at the chaotic dance of light and color. The guy who was Spider-Man before me, my world's Peter Parker, he died trying to stop the machine I told you about. He died right in front of me. And he gave me the mission. Destroy the Collider. He put the fate of the whole city, the whole universe, in my hands. He paused, the memory still sharp, still painful. And I ran. I went back to my dorm and I hid. I figured I'm just a kid. I can't do this. This is too big. Someone else will handle it. A real hero will show up. Deku listened, his own spiral slowing. He was hearing his own secret fears spoken aloud by this stranger from another world. But no one else was coming, Miles said. He looked over at Deku, his gaze direct and unflinching. It was just me. And I was terrified. I felt like every choice I made was the wrong one, that I was just gonna make things worse. I felt like a fraud. He gestured vaguely at Deku's armored costume. You look the part. You've got the power, the gear, all of it. When this happened to me, I had a store-bought costume that didn't even fit right. A ghost of a smile touched Miles's lips. The point is, freaking out doesn't solve the problem. It's part of the process, sure. You gotta let yourself feel it. But you can't stay here, man. He tapped the side of his head. You can't stay stuck in the spiral. Because that portal isn't going to close itself. And your friend with the goggles, she's smart, but she looks like she's about 2 seconds from trying to weaponize this thing. So it's on us. He pushed himself to his feet and offered a hand down to Deku. We're the ones who were here when it happened. We're the ones with the crazy, world-breaking powers. So we're the ones who have to fix it. You and me. Deku stared at Miles's outstretched hand. It was just a hand. A kid's hand, calloused from drawing and probably a few other things, sticking out of the sleeve of a hoodie. But in that moment, it was a lifeline. It was an anchor in the storm of his own guilt. Miles wasn't blaming him. He wasn't yelling at him. He was relating. He was offering not pity, but partnership. He was saying, I see your impossible burden, and I'm not going to let you carry it alone. Slowly, Deku reached out and took his hand. Miles's grip was firm, steady. He pulled Deku to his feet. The moment of bonding, of a fragile alliance being forged in the crucible of multiversal chaos, was immediately shattered by a piercing alarm from May's console. Guys? May called out, her voice strained with a new level of panic. I've got a problem! Both boys rushed over to the console, All Might right behind them. The holographic display was flashing red. A graph showing the portal's energy consumption was spiking dramatically. What is it? What's happening? All Might demanded. The siphon is becoming more aggressive. May yelled over the alarm. It's not just pulling ambient energy anymore. It's pulling on a specific high-mass object from the other side. It's trying to drag something big through. As she spoke, the portal pulsed violently. The humming sound deepened into a guttural, grinding roar. The glitching colors inside swirled faster and faster, forming a terrifying vortex. The fabric of reality in the gym screamed in protest. A section of the ceiling above the portal flickered, and for a terrifying instant, it was replaced by a tangled mess of steel girders and rusted tracks, the underside of an elevated subway line. Then it snapped back. The pull intensified. A heavy equipment rack on the far side of the gym, bolted to the floor, groaned under the strain, the metal screeching as the bolts began to tear free from the concrete. It was happening. The bleed was becoming an invasion. And from the agonized, tearing sound coming from the portal, it was clear that whatever was coming through was not coming through cleanly. It was being broken, twisted, and merged with the raw, violent energies of their own world. It was being remade into something new, something monstrous. The monstrous thing that had been ripped from Miles's world lay dead and silent in the center of the gym. It was a grotesque sculpture of interdimensional trauma, half Nomu, half subway car, its twisted metal and mutated flesh already beginning to pixelate at the edges, slowly dissolving back into the raw data from which it had been so violently assembled. The immediate threat was over, but the air in Gamma Gym was thick with the aftershock, a cocktail of acrid smoke, ozone, and the chilling realization of just how close they had all come to being torn apart. The portal itself had shrunk back to its previous size, its hum a low, almost mocking thrum. It seemed sated for now. May Hatsume was a whirlwind of frantic activity, her previous manic glee replaced by the grim focus of a bomb disposal expert who had just watched a colleague cut the wrong wire. Her fingers flew across her holographic console, her goggles reflecting the cascading streams of data. Energy levels are stabilizing, she announced, her voice tight with residual adrenaline. The dimensional siphon has receded to baseline. It seems pulling that thing through took a lot out of it. It's back to a passive state. She ran a hand through her pink dreadlocks, leaving a new streak of grease. But that was a warning shot. A proof of concept. The barrier is weak. It can and will happen again. All Might stood over the dissolving remains of the creature, his face a grim mask. He had seen the horrors of the Noma firsthand, engineered abominations designed for nothing but destruction. But this was different. This was nature itself being perverted, reality turned into a weapon. His gaze shifted to the two boys. They were standing a few feet apart, breathing heavily, their bodies bruised and their nerves frayed. Miles was leaning against a support pillar, favoring a leg he'd twisted dodging a metal shard. Deku was staring at his own hands, his armored gloves scorched and smoking, a look of profound shock on his face. They had won, but the victory felt hollow, terrifying. It was a glimpse into the abyss. Deku's mind was a maelstrom. He was replaying the fight, every motion, every decision. His initial attacks had been clumsy, brute force applications of power. A 20% Delaware smash had dented the creature's metallic hide but hadn't stopped its advance. Gene-powered kicks had sent it stumbling, but it was like kicking a mountain. He had been fighting a problem, not an opponent. He was throwing power at a glitch in the universe, and it was barely making a dent. Then Miles had moved. Deku watched him, even in the heat of battle, with the analytical part of his brain that never truly shut down. Miles hadn't engaged the creature head-on. He'd moved like water, flowing around its clumsy, powerful strikes. He'd used the environment, ricocheting off walls, using a severed piece of the gym floor as a springboard. He'd webbed a support beam and swung over the creature's head, landing a precise, bioelectric punch not to the creature's main body, but to a cluster of exposed, mutated muscle tissue that looked suspiciously like a Noma's power conduit. The venom blast hadn't destroyed the creature, but it had made it seize up, its systems short-circuiting for a crucial second. That was the opening Deku had needed. It was a completely different way of fighting. It wasn't about overwhelming power. It was about rhythm, improvisation, and precision. It was about finding the weak point, not trying to break the whole thing. It was a style. Miles, meanwhile, was doing his own post-mortem. That kid Midoriya was a force of nature. The raw power he wielded was unlike anything Miles had ever seen. It was like fighting alongside a human hurricane, but he was stiff. Predictable. His movements were all straight lines and explosive bursts. He moved from A to B with terrifying speed, but he didn't seem to consider the space in between. He fought like a diagram in a textbook. Condition X requires move Y. There was no flow, no swing. He was a rocket, when sometimes, what you needed was a kite. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. The two boys were on opposite sides of the gym, lost in their own thoughts, the chasm between their experiences and fighting styles seeming as wide as the dimensional rift itself. It was Deku who broke the silence. He walked over to Miles, his footsteps heavy on the cracked concrete. Your electricity, Deku began, the words coming out slowly as he processed the thought. You didn't aim for the center of mass. You aimed for the exposed musculature. You analyzed its weak point mid-combat, and delivered a targeted strike to disable it, not destroy it. That created the opening I needed. Miles pushed himself off the pillar, wincing slightly. Yeah, well, when you're my size, you don't pick fights with bulldozers head-on. You look for the off switch. He looked Deku up and down, at the powerful physique, the armored suit. You, on the other hand, you fight like you are the bulldozer. It wasn't an insult. It was a simple, direct observation. But it hit Deku harder than any punch. He'd been told he was reckless, that he relied too much on power. He'd heard it from Aizawa, from Gran Torino, from All Might. But hearing it from this kid, this stranger who fought with such impossible grace and efficiency, made the criticism land differently. I have to be, Deku said, a defensive edge to his voice. The villains I fight, they're too strong. I have to hit them with everything I have, as hard as I can. And what happens when everything you have isn't the right tool for the job? Miles countered, his voice quiet but firm. What happens when it makes things worse? He gestured vaguely at the portal. The unspoken accusation hung in the air. What happens is this. Deku flinched, the words striking a raw nerve. His desperate attempt to use everything he had was precisely what had trapped them in this nightmare. Seeing the look of renewed guilt on Deku's face, Miles softened his tone. He hadn't meant to wound him, only to make a point. Look, man, I'm not trying to bust your chops. That thing was a monster. We took it down. Together. That's a win. He paused, then took a step closer. But we were clumsy. We were stepping on each other's toes. If another one of those things comes through, or something worse, we need to be better. We need to be on the same page. A new idea began to form in Miles's mind, born from long hours of training with Peter B. Parker, who had tried to teach a clumsy, terrified kid how to be Spider-Man. We need to train, Miles said, a spark of determination in his eyes. Not separately. Together. You need to see how I move, and I need to understand what the hell all that lightning is about. He grinned, a flash of his usual easygoing charm breaking through the tension. So, you want to spar? For science? Deku stared at him. Spar? Now? With the fate of a universe hanging in the balance? It seemed insane. Frivolous. And yet, it also made a strange kind of sense. Their last fight had been pure, panicked reaction. They had no synergy, no coordination. They were two solo acts forced onto the same stage. If they were going to face this threat together, they needed to learn each other's rhythm. All Might, who had been listening intently, stepped forward. A rare, hopeful smile touched his lips. An excellent idea, young Morales. A sparring session would be invaluable. It would allow you both to blow off some steam and, more importantly, to build the trust and coordination you will undoubtedly need. He looked at Mei, who was still furiously typing at her console. Hatsume, can the gym systems handle a session? And can you monitor their energy outputs? The data could be crucial. Mei's head popped up, her eyes wide with renewed excitement. The prospect of collecting combat data from a transdimensional being was apparently too good to resist. Handle it? Are you kidding? Gamma Gym was built to withstand a full-power all-might workout. A little tussle between these two will be a walk in the park. She grinned. And data? Oh, I will collect so much data. I'll map every joule of energy, every vector of movement. This will be my magnum opus. And so, the most unusual sparring session in the history of UA High was arranged. The dissolving corpse of the glitch monster was cleared away by cleaning drones. The configurable floor of the gym, on Mei's command, began to shift and reform. Pillars of concrete rose from the ground, walls slid into new positions, and metal platforms extended from the walls, creating a complex, multi-leveled urban assault course. It was a crude, brutalist approximation of a city block. Try to keep property damage to a minimum, boys. Mei chirped from her console on a newly elevated observation platform. But not too minimal. I need good stress test numbers. Deku and Miles stood on opposite ends of the newly formed arena. The air between them crackled with anticipation. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about understanding. Okay, Deku said, settling into his familiar shoot-style stance, one leg forward, arms ready. Rules of engagement? Rule 1, no hitting in the face. Too hard anyway, Miles said, stretching his arms over his head. Rule 2, first one to yield or get successfully immobilized loses. Rule 3, he grinned, try to have a little fun with it. You look like you're about to take a final exam you didn't study for. Deku didn't smile back. He couldn't. Fun was a luxury he couldn't afford. Ready? Ready, Miles confirmed. Begin! All Might's voice boomed from the sidelines. Deku moved first. He activated One for All, the familiar green lightning crackling around him. He didn't dare go above 8%, not for a spar, but even at that level, his speed was breathtaking. He shot across the floor, a green blur aimed directly at Miles, intending to close the distance, and use his superior strength to end it quickly. It was a classic Deku opening. Direct. Powerful. And utterly predictable. Miles didn't even try to meet him head-on. Just as Deku was about to reach him, Miles dropped, his body going completely limp. He fell into a breakdancer's spin on the floor, his legs scissoring out. Deku, unable to stop his forward momentum, shot right over him. As he passed, Miles's hand shot out and slapped the back of Deku's armored boot. A jolt of bioelectricity, a low-level venom blast no stronger than a static shock, coursed through Deku's leg. It wasn't enough to hurt him, but it was enough to make the muscles in his calf seize up for a split second. The tiny, unexpected spasm was enough to throw his balance completely off. He stumbled, catching himself before he fell, and spun around, his eyes wide with surprise. Miles was already back on his feet, 10 feet away, bouncing lightly on the balls of his feet. Too stiff, he called out, his voice echoing in the gym. You're all forward momentum, you gotta be able to stop on a dime. Or, not get tripped like a rookie. Deku's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. He'd been completely outplayed. He recalibrated. Speed and power weren't enough. He needed to be smarter. He activated Black Whip, a single dark tendril erupting from his arm. He lashed it out, not at Miles, but at a pillar behind him, intending to yank himself forward and attack from a different angle. The whip shot out, fast and true. But just before it made contact with the pillar, Miles fired a web. A glob of thick, white fluid intercepted the tip of Black Whip in midair, sticking to it. The web line was anchored to the floor. Deku's whip was now stuck fast. "What is that stuff?" Deku asked, stunned, as he tried to retract his whip, only to find it held fast. "My own special brew," Miles said with a grin. "Tensile strength of about 600 pounds per square centimeter. Also, a real pain to get out of laundry." While Deku was momentarily distracted, trying to wrench his black whip free, Miles sprang into action. He ran up a wall, his feet and hands sticking to the sheer concrete surface, defying gravity with an ease that made Deku's use of float seem clumsy and effortful. From the wall, he leaped, firing 2 web lines that attached to the ceiling, and then he swung. It wasn't the utilitarian, point-to-point movement that Deku used with Black Whip. This was different. This was artistry. Miles fell into the swing, his body a perfect pendulum. He let his momentum carry him, twisting in midair, his form a perfect blend of acrobatic grace and controlled physics. It was silent, fluid, and beautiful. He swung in a wide arc, landing silently on a platform high above the gym floor. Deku, who had finally managed to dissolve the ensnared portion of his Black Whip, just stared up at him, mesmerized. He used float to rise into the air, meeting Miles at his level. How did you do that?" Deku asked, his voice filled with genuine awe. "The swing. It was so effortless." "It's not effortless," Miles corrected, sitting on the edge of the platform, his legs dangling. "It's about the fall. Peter B. The other Spider-Man who trained me, he told me it's not about the swing up, it's about the letting go. You just fall and you aim. You feel the rhythm of it." He looked at Deku's Black Whip, which was still simmering with dark energy around his arm. "That thing you got. You use it like a rope. A tool. But it could be more." He stood up. "Come here. Try it. Swing from here to that other platform over there." He pointed to a platform about 30 yards away. "But don't just pull yourself. Try to fall into it." Deku was hesitant. This went against all his training, which was focused on control, precision, and minimizing unnecessary movement. But he looked at the grace with which Miles had moved, and he knew he had to try. He fired a tendril of Black Whip, anchoring it to the target platform. He took a deep breath and leaped. His instinct was to pull, to use his immense strength to rocket himself across the gap. But Miles's words echoed in his head. "Let go." He forced himself to relax his arm, to fall. For a terrifying second, he plummeted, his stomach lurching. But then the whip caught his momentum, and he swung. It was clumsy, awkward. He was too stiff, his body held rigid with tension. He didn't swing in a graceful arc. He jerked through the air like a marionette with a clumsy puppeteer. He landed on the far platform with a heavy thud, stumbling and nearly falling off the edge. Miles swung over, landing next to him as silently as a cat. "Not bad. For a brick." He grinned to show he was joking. "You're thinking too much. You're calculating the trajectory, the force, the velocity. You gotta feel it, man. It's like music. There's a beat. A rhythm. You're fighting the music." He gestured around them. "This whole city thing," he said, pointing to the pillars and platforms. "This is my playground. Back home, I swing through canyons of glass and steel. You can't just go in a straight line. You gotta use the whole canvas. You gotta have style." Style. The word was alien to Deku's combat vocabulary. His style was shoot style. It was practical, efficient, designed to do maximum damage while minimizing self-harm. It had no room for aesthetics. "Style doesn't win battles," Deku countered, his frustration growing. "Power and strategy win battles. Style keeps you alive when power and strategy fail." Miles shot back, his voice serious now. "It's about being unpredictable. It's about moving in a way they can't anticipate. When you move like a textbook, you're easy to read. Style is your own personal signature. It's what makes you you." He pointed at Deku's chest. "You've got all this power. 7 different powers, you said? That's insane. But you're using them like a checklist. I saw it in the fight. You think, okay, I need to capture, I'll use Black Whip. Then I need to hit hard, I'll use my super strength. You're not combining them. You're not letting them flow into each other. This hit Deku like a physical blow. It was the exact same problem he had identified himself, the very thing he had been trying to fix when he tore a hole in reality. But Miles wasn't just identifying the problem. He was offering a different kind of solution. Not more power, not more control in the rigid sense, but flow. Rhythm. Show me, Deku said, his voice quiet. Show me what you mean. Miles's expression lit up. All right. Let's change things up. You're the pursuer. I'm the target. Your goal is to land a single, clean hit on me. My goal is to not get hit. Use everything you've got. Deku nodded, a new determination hardening his expression. He wasn't just sparring now. He was learning. What followed was a masterclass in motion. Deku, fueled by a desire to prove himself, threw himself into the chase. He used float for verticality, FA gene for explosive bursts of speed, and Black Whip to traverse the complex environment. He was faster, stronger, and more powerful than Miles in every conceivable metric, and he couldn't lay a single finger on him. Miles was a ghost. He flowed through the urban jungle like he was born in it. He swung under platforms, ran along the sides of pillars, and used his webs in ways Deku couldn't even imagine. He created tripwires, nets, and spring-loaded traps. He used the environment as a weapon, kicking up dust to obscure his movements, ricocheting small pebbles to create distractions. But the most frustrating part for Deku was the invisibility. Several times he would have Miles cornered, only for him to vanish into thin air. His distinctive black and red suit would just fade, blending into the background like a chameleon. Deku would be left punching at empty air as Miles reappeared behind him, tapping him lightly on the shoulder. You can turn invisible? Deku finally yelled, exasperated, after the 4th time this happened. Miles reappeared, hanging upside down from a web line, a wide grin on his face. Venom camouflage. Cool, right? It's part of the package. Deku was floored. Invisibility, bioelectricity, wall crawling, a sixth sense, super strength, and the web shooters. Miles wasn't just a kid with one power. He was a whole hero team rolled into one, and he used every single tool in his arsenal with a seamless, improvisational flair that Deku could only envy. The spar continued, but Deku's approach began to change. He stopped trying to just catch Miles. He started watching him. He started learning. He saw how Miles would use the momentum of a swing to launch himself into a wall run, how he would use a venom blast not as an attack, but to power a piece of machinery to create a distraction. He was seeing, for the first time, what true synergy looked like. He started to experiment. Instead of just using Black Whip as a grappling hook, he tried to emulate Miles's swing, to feel the rhythm of the fall. His first few attempts were still clumsy, but he was getting better. He started using FAG not just for linear bursts, but to add a sudden, unpredictable change of direction in midair. He used smokescreen not just to hide, but to channel Miles's movements, forcing him into a specific area. He was beginning to understand. It wasn't about using 7 quirks. It was about using one power, one for all, that had 7 different expressions. It was about letting them blend and flow together. Finally, after what felt like an hour, Deku saw an opening. Miles had just landed on a low pillar, and for a split second, his back was turned. Deku saw his chance. He channeled FA gene into his legs, activated float for a silent approach, and launched himself forward. He pulled his fist back for a gentle, open palm tap, the goal of their exercise. He was going to get him, but at the last second, Miles's head whipped around. His spidey sense had warned him. But he didn't dodge. He didn't jump away. He did something Deku never would have anticipated. He went completely invisible and dropped to the ground. At the exact same time, he fired a web line that wrapped around Deku's ankle. Deku's forward momentum, combined with the sudden anchor on his leg, sent him tumbling. He went down in a heap, landing hard on the gym floor. Before he could even register what had happened, he was cocooned. Web lines shot out from every direction, wrapping around his arms, his legs, his torso, pinning him completely to the floor. He was utterly, completely immobilized. Miles reappeared, standing over him, one foot planted firmly on the web that held Deku's chest down. He was breathing hard, but he was grinning. "Yield?" Miles asked, his voice playful. Deku lay there, pinned and helpless, staring up at the ceiling. He had lost. He had been completely and totally outmaneuvered by someone with a fraction of his raw power. And yet, he wasn't angry, he wasn't frustrated, he was inspired. He let out a long breath and a genuine, unforced laugh. It was the first time he had truly laughed since before the war. "I yield," he said, a wide smile spreading across his face. On the observation deck, All Might watched with tears in his eyes. He wasn't watching a sparring session. He was watching his successor learn one of the most important lessons a hero could ever learn. That strength is not the same as power, and that control is not the same as mastery. May, for her part, was practically vibrating out of her jumpsuit. "The data! Oh, the data is exquisite!" she squealed, pointing at her screen. "Look at the energy patterns! Midoriya's output is becoming less spiky, more fluid. And Morales' bioelectric field, it resonates with his nervous system in a way that's almost precognitive. Their synergy levels increased by 400% over the course of the session. This is revolutionary." Her eyes lit up with a familiar, terrifying gleam. "Based on this data, I think I have it. A theory. A way to reverse the polarity of the energy handshake without causing a catastrophic dimensional collapse." She started working furiously, her earlier despair forgotten, replaced by the thrill of an impossible problem that was suddenly, tantalizingly, solvable. She began sketching out a design, a complex device of focusing lenses and energy dampeners. Down on the gym floor, Miles dissolved the webs with a special solvent spray he had in a small canister on his belt, freeing a still smiling Deku. "You're really amazing," Deku said, getting to his feet and rubbing his wrists. "I've never seen anyone fight like that." "You're not so bad yourself, for a guy who hits like a runaway train," Miles said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You just gotta learn to steer." In that moment, something fundamental shifted between them. The awkwardness, the guilt, the fear, it was all still there, lurking under the surface. But now, it was joined by something new and powerful. Mutual respect. A bond forged in combat and understanding. They were no longer just two teen heroes from different worlds caught in a crisis. They were partners. A team. And as Hatsume finalized the schematics for a desperate, long-shot plan, they both knew they would need that partnership. The portal was still humming, a constant reminder of the collapsing dimension and the impossible task that lay ahead. But for the first time since it had ripped open, they weren't just facing it with fear, they were facing it with a glimmer of hope.